Hello! I have a physical book to hold up for once, but only because I was lied to at a Barnes & Noble. The store I went to had a little display, I guess, that said, if you like this book, then you like this book. And one of the pairings on that display was, if you like Circe by Madeline Miller, then you will like Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson. Sadly, that sign was not very accurate for me, but maybe it will be for you. I was vastly in the minority when it comes to my feelings on this book. This has a 4.3 on Goodreads, which kind of made my resolve to make this video dissipate a little, because a 4.3 on Goodreads is kind of insane. So obviously this is a very well-loved book. Anne Carson is a brilliant writer, but art and writing are subjective. It's one of the beautiful things about them. And so I'm determined to explain why this book fell a little short for me, because I think good faith criticism is an important aspect of the reading community. So this is in no way me hating on Anne Carson for no reason, just kind of explaining my thoughts on the book and why, if you have similar tastes and interests as I do, maybe this isn't necessarily the book for you. So I thought I would orient this review by telling you a little bit about Greek mythology, specifically the story of Geryon. Now, yes, I know in English the GE usually makes the hard G, like geryon, but I have only ever heard geryon in reference to the protagonist of this book, Autobiography in Red, and the corresponding material in Greek mythology, so don't come after me for saying geryon. Here's a drastically simplified overview of where he fits into Greek mythos. So you all know Heracles, Hercules. I don't know why it sounded like I was trying to introduce him to you right there. Heracles, booktube. Now we've all met each other. So after Heracles loses his mind and kills his wife and children, as you do, he is tasked with completing 12 labors. That's kind of like his penance. His 10th labor is stealing, but we'll call it retrieving, the cattle of Geryon from his island of Erythea. In this particular story, Geryon is a three-headed, six-legged monster. So Heracles goes to Erythea, he clubs Geryon's dog to death, he kills his herdsman, and then when Geryon comes out to defend his home and his cattle, Heracles shoots him through the skull with an arrow and he dies. Real stand-up dude. So the OG story is kind of this celebration of violence that gets justified by this whole aspect of destiny and divine intervention and all this stuff. What's really interesting about this story, though, is that it gets revisited in the 6th century BCE by a Greek lyric poet named Stesichoros, who writes a poem called the Geryoneis. And this kind of tells the story of Geryon's death from his perspective. It kind of tells his side of the story. It's a poem that really humanizes Geryon in a really interesting way, and it includes some really emotional scenes, like his parents trying to convince him to not fight Heracles, and a very lengthy description of his final moments. This is how his death is described after he gets shot in the head or the neck. Then Geryon rested his neck to one side, as might a poppy when it mars, the tenderness of its body shedding suddenly all its petals. Very beautiful stuff. It's really fascinating to me to see this sympathetic depiction of a monster that only ever previously existed as just kind of this side character, this throwaway character for the hero, for a very revered hero, in fact, to just kind of kill without any real moral or emotional conflict. So what does all of this have to do with Anne Carson? Well, Autobiography of Red is a Geryoneis retelling, kind of. It's a modern retelling / character study of Geryon set in modern-ish times. The setting is a little bit hazy, and it's told in verse, which I'll get into. When I heard that, knowing what I already knew about Geryon and the Geryoneis, I got really excited because there's so much you can do when you boil down the story of Heracles' 10th labor to its essential components and tell it from the monster or the victim's point of view. So I was expecting this story to be about a person who is an outcast in some way, being horribly wronged by someone that everyone else regards as a hero. That's a big theme in Geryoneus, and I was thinking maybe Autobiography of Red will have Heracles take something from Geryon. Maybe it's a possession, maybe he steals Geryon's friends, maybe he, I don't know, steals his role in society. Maybe if Carson wanted to do something really dark, maybe he assaults Geryon in some way, and then after Geryon is wronged, maybe his entire community sides with Heracles instead, as a way to parallel how audiences that originally heard the story of Heracles' 10th labor in the original lyric poems were just intended to side with Heracles because he's the beloved epic hero after all, why wouldn't you? So that's the story I wanted / expected. Is it the story I got? Kind of, not really. So autobiography starts with, well, actually, I was gonna say it starts with Geryon as a child, but really it starts off with this prelude that talks about stesichoros' impact, and it does so in a very strange way. Let me find you this passage. Okay, I'm gonna read you a little passage, and you try to tell me what stesichoros is doing in this passage. So into the still surface of this code, stesichoros is born, and stesichoros was studying the surface relentlessly. It leaned away from him. He went closer. It stopped. Passion for substances seems a good description of that moment. For no reason that anyone can name, stesichoros began to undo the latches. Stesichoros released being. All the substances in the world went floating up. So what is stesichoros doing here that prompted a description like that? If you guessed using adjectives, congratulations. Carson sets up this novella in such a way that I think it's going to be about words and language. In fact, I would argue that this is a novella entirely about visuals, often at the cost of telling a coherent story, in my opinion, which is weird for a number of reasons, but one of them is that the book is in part called Autobiography of Red because Geryon, the protagonist, is writing an autobiography throughout the book, which she starts at 8 years old, which, what the hell is an 8-year-old writing an autobiography for? What do you have to say about your life at 8 years old? But the main character is a writer, that's neat, whatever, but then partway through the book he picks up photography, and then I feel from that point forward the story is very obsessed with how things look and perception and visuals. And I feel that in some ways this aspect of Geryon's character is used by Carson as kind of an excuse to focus exclusively on conveying a certain atmosphere as opposed to any kind of character development or telling an interesting story. When I do this, it's going to convey a line break. This whole novella is written in verse, and I just think that was such a strange choice. To me, the line breaks often feel so awkwardly placed, and it doesn't rhyme or anything, it's free verse, and it honestly just seems like a rough draft of a story that is only verse because there are random line breaks thrown in. But let me get to the example. Well, good night then, they said, and drove him up those hemorrhaging stairs to the hot, dry arms, to the ticking red taxi of the incubus. Don't want to go, want to stay downstairs and read. Don't ask me for context because this quote is somehow less confusing out of context. So what is this novella about? Strap in because a lot happens in 100 pages. The book begins with Geryon as a child. I think it starts when he's 5. He's described as a winged red monster, and no one in this book notices. I guess he wears baggy clothing to hide his wings, but is his skin not red? I've seen reviewers call him a red-winged monster, but that's not what the back of the book says. Red-winged monster could maybe mean he just has wings that are red. The back of the book says winged red monster, which I would take to mean his entire body is bright red and he also has wings. But whatever, that's a nitpick. I can suspend my disbelief. Okay, nobody realizes anything is wrong with this kid. As a child, geryon lives in a dysfunctional home with an absent father, an oblivious mother, no real friends to speak of, and for some reason, he has an older brother who molests him. And look, I'm not against dark subject matter in books, but I like it to at least mean something. The brother has little to no impact on the story, and seemingly neither does the abuse that geryon goes through. There's no real resolution, but it also doesn't seem to have any discernible effect on geryon's future relationship or his body image or anything like that. So I think it was a very weird choice, because if anyone were to be abusive in this book, it should have been Heracles, right? But no, instead, geryon and Heracles meet when they're teenagers, and they enter a somewhat romantic but mostly sexual relationship. Heracles is a bit of a loser, but I don't think he's abusive. He does, however, break up with geryon, or like break up, I don't know if they were officially dating, and books it to Peru, I believe. And then later, geryon moves to Argentina, where he runs into Heracles and his new lover Ancash, and then the three of them go to Peru, and it turns out, as discovered by Ancash, geryon is like this, I don't know, he's this specific kind of monster that was really important to like the indigenous people of Argentina. No, to Peru, I'm sorry. The last like 15-20 pages of the novella moved weirdly fast. I don't know if it's ever stated why any of them go to South America, but I do think the novella was at its best during the period where geryon was in South America. There are some very introspective moments where he runs into some interesting people, he has interesting conversations. I almost just wish the entire story were about this character going to South America, meeting interesting people, having very philosophical conversations. "Thank you," said geryon and bit into an olive. He was very hungry and ate 7 more, fast. Smiling a bit, Lazar watched him. "You eat like my daughter, with a certain, shall I say, lucidity." "How old is your daughter?" asked geryon. 4, not quite human, or perhaps a little beyond human." See, it's kind of hard to hate the novella for lines like that. This book is peppered with so many interesting little tidbits that just make you want to sit back and really savor the lines. So I guess at the end of the day, it's kind of up to you if those little snippets are enough to keep you engaged throughout what I think is a very haphazard narrative with not a lot of character development. Someone is calling this possibly the greatest queer coming-of-age tale ever. I don't know about that one, but people are saying it's smart and sweet and tender and original. It is certainly original. It's erotic, but just under your skin. I would not call this book erotic. Maybe don't read it out loud in front of your mom, but truly the lack of chemistry between Heracles and geryon in this book was insane. I think this book is definitely for someone, I mean, clearly it's for some people if it got a 4.3 on, I almost said Rotten Tomatoes, on Goodreads. Although I do think this being verse, it's a bit of a self-selecting audience. I don't know, maybe it's completely me, maybe I'm just not cultured enough to appreciate it, but I do think that there were some problems in Autobiography of Red that went beyond just me not really loving novels written in verse. I've read some good verse before, even though free verse isn't my favorite thing ever, and I think they did a much better job of balancing mood with plot than this particular book did. And especially for what it promised and for the really amazing literature that it was based off of. You know, why did it have to be Geryon and Heracles? Maybe that's my biggest issue. This could have been about anyone. I don't see the tie to the original source material. Okay, anyway, like I said in my review, tiny little book, right? So if you're curious, may as well give it a shot. You can probably pick this up in a bookstore and read the whole thing and not even have to pay for it if you don't think it's going to be a worthwhile investment. If you don't like verse / you didn't vibe with autobiography, but you really like books that are short and lyrical, even if not necessarily like lyrical in a poetic sense, but just beautifully written, and books with contemplative queer male protagonists, you should read Lie With Me by, not the French name, Philippe Besson instead. Sorry, Philippe. I think that's a much better queer coming-of-age story, learn to accept yourself, than this book. I don't know. Thanks for listening to this review. I hate not loving a book because I love hyping books up so much, but this one didn't do it for me. Maybe it'll do it for you. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, thank you so much for watching.